I've got a project I've been wanting to do to the Jeep since the day I got it, and it's finally time. Let's get back to the garage and fabricate up some rock sliders. So the factory Jeep sliders on the Rubicon, they actually work out pretty well. They've got some decent coverage. They tuck in pretty nice and tight and everything. As you saw in one of the previous videos, I was able to put my high lift jack under the slider and break the bead on a tire. So, I mean, you can put a fair amount of weight on that thing, no problem, and it holds up. But I want a bit more protection. First off, I need to buzz off the factory sliders and see what we're working with so we can start building. Quick and easy. A little bit of tape, not just good for protecting the body, but it's also really good to draw some lines on and make getting your dimensions a whole lot easier. So you can see I've got my little points here. That's going to be about where I want my bends, my start stops. So you can see, again, just a little bit of blue tape. It's not going to mess up the sheet metal or mess up the paint, I guess, but it gives you something good to draw on and protect it as well. So now that I've got that, I can transfer it over to my full layout, and then I can start getting after some steel. When you're bending tube, this is a simple one. All you need, a couple of vice grips and a file. All you're going to do is on either end, as long as you've got more than one piece of tube, clamp the tubes together so that they're nice and flat. Do it on both ends. And then with them clamped together, grab your file, lay the file right on top, and you're going to run it all the way down, back and forth. You're going to make a nice line on top of the tubing. After you did the first side, flip the tubing over, leave those clamps right in place, and do it again. Now what you've done by doing this, if you look and catch the light just right, you can see I've got a reference point here and one here. And then I flip the tubing over, and I've got two more reference points that are 180 degrees out from those first two. So that just makes it simple. When you're bending tube, you need to flip it, rotate it, get some reference points. You've got those two marks that are 180 out. If you need to make two bends on the same exact plane, you've got that to line it up with. Just makes it a whole lot easier. After some quick layout, this is what we're working with. So you can see I just put down some paper. It just is easier. You can see my black lines here. Basically, that's the shape of the slider. You can see I've denoted back there. That's the back of the truck. That's going to be the front end. And then this is my frame side, just so I don't really bugger it up and forget what end I'm working on or whatnot. But simple and easy. Got my measurements, got my bend locations, transfer it to steel and start bending some tube. All right, so now we got everything laid out on the tubing. Let's see what it would look like here. This is a really simple tube job. So you can see I've got my center lines marked there, black. So, it blends in real well for you guys. And then this basically is going to be the start of one of my bends. And that's the start of my other bends. So I've got those lined up so that both tubes will be able to be bent in the same locations. Should be able to end up with the same result on them. Let's do this. Got all my slider spreaders cut. Now I just need to mark and notch them all. Quick tip for you guys. If you can set up some kind of stop when you're doing multiple pieces that are all going to be exactly the same, it makes it so much quicker and easier. You don't have to measure every single time. So do yourself a favor, take a couple minutes to figure out a stop. For me, I'm just going to do a little piece of angle iron here, clamped right to the frame of the notcher. And that way I'll be able to slide my piece in every single time and bump it right up to that stop and just keep on cranking. Makes it go a lot quicker. Anytime I'm welding, I always try to have nice clean metal to work with. It's going to give you the best opportunity at a good weld. Hot rolled always has that mill scale on it, that kind of blackish brown stuff that's on there. Kind of helps it from rusting. But again, if you can get that cleaned off, you're going to end up with a better weld. Something like that. Again, got the mill scale clean from where I'm going to be welding, so that's all I need to worry about. So I went back and forth on how many spreader bars I wanted to have on each of the sliders. Initially I was thinking 3, but I've always done 4. I like 4. There tends to be a little bit more strength, depending on the length of the slider anyway. So I ended up doing 1 of each and just kind of seeing which I preferred. You can see the one on the left, I've got 4 spreader bars there, and then the one on the right, we've got the 3. So I like 4. It's going to be stronger. It's going to hold up better. So I'm going to bust the tacks loose on that one, make it look like that one, and we'll move on to the next step. Everything's all tacked up, now for a little hood time. Next up, I want to cap the holes here at the end of the tube. Just don't want to get water, debris, anything in there. Got these cool little spiked looking ends that Barnes Offroad makes. Just sits on top and burn those suckers in. Now you might be asking yourself, why is this knucklehead running TIG on these little end caps when he's done MIG on the rest of it? Bottom line, I haven't stomped on that pedal in a while and I need some practice. So these aren't structural. It's a good place to do a little bit of tube TIG welding and see if I can get my skill back. We'll find out. Next up, it's time to figure out how we're going to attach these things. With sliders, there's 2 ways that you can do them. You can either weld them to the frame or you can find something to bolt them to, whether it be like the body mount, some existing holes or something like that. For me, anything that tends to get hit by a rock, gets beat up, pushed around, mangled, I'm not really a fan of bolt-on because if you ever take it off, the bolts never really line up again. So for me, sliders, I almost always just weld them onto the frame, be done with it. When you're welding it to the frame, one thing I always like to do, scab plates. Scab plates basically are going to help distribute the load from where you weld to. If you just put, so I'm using 1 3/4 120 wall DOM. If I just put that straight to the frame, you can see that's a pretty small area that I'm actually welding to. So there's not a ton of load being distributed on the frame at that point. So what I do is I take a scab plate, I weld that onto the frame, and then I weld my tube to the scab plate. A couple of things to pay attention to when you're fabbing sliders: figuring out your angles, making sure that your angles are doing what you want to get out of them. If you're going to use the sliders as steps, you're also going to look at how they lay over and everything. Let's take a peek here. So on 4-doors, what I found out is that you definitely, and I've done this a handful of times, but you don't want to match the front angle, kind of the approach here, to the rear. Some instances you can, but like on this one, I want to have a little bit more lead in. I think I ended up with like, I don't know, 58 degrees on that. But on the back end here, you can see where I'm kind of coming into the rear guard here. If I made the same angle back there, the angle would start bending roughly here. So if I'm going to use it as a step at all, that's going to limit the step area. So a lot of times on the back end, you end up knocking that in and doing a much more steep angle. I think on this one I did about 72 degrees. So you just have to pay attention to that kind of stuff. Another one, make sure your doors are going to open and close. because that's one that absolutely stinks, is to get these all done and then your door comes out, or the first time that you tap a rock, slider bends up because it's not supported properly, bends up into your door, and then you can't get the door open. So just a few things to kind of keep an eye on while you're going through and setting sliders up. Got the sliders all mocked up, tacked in place. What I'll do now is I'll break all those tacks loose, pull the sliders back off of the truck, and then I'll go ahead and burn in everything that I can off of the truck, leaving just the attachment point from the leg to those scab plates. Let me show you. So you can see right here, this is my scab plate that I was telling you guys about earlier. I've just got that tacked on as well. And then I've got the legs for the slider just tacked to that. So I'll bust these tacks loose, pull that thing off, then I can burn in the scab plates, and then I can weld everything on the sliders as well. Do it on the bench so it's just easier to get to everything, because these top sections, that's kind of tough. I can even show you here. That right there is kind of tough to get to when it's on the vehicle. So I'll be able to weld that on the workbench and then just do the other part afterwards. So I've got this base that I built for a project years back, and I just keep it hanging around. But it's got 1 3/4 120 wall deal in right there, and then I've just grabbed a scrap of 1.5 inches that I had laying around, slid that down in there, locked it in, and I'm able to drop the slider right on there. So it makes it super easy to be able to paint this thing and have it at a comfortable height, but also keep it so that it's not being hung by hooks that are going to leave spots that aren't painted, or setting it on something that will leave spots that aren't painted. So should work out pretty well. Now I just got to get it cleaned up and get to painting. Now, before we start burning stuff in on the Jeep, I always like to disconnect the battery. You'll hear people on both sides of the argument. You don't need to. Some say you do need to. Me, I always prefer play it safe, disconnect the battery. That way you don't have to worry about anything on there. And it doesn't take that long. I like to just throw something down between the cable and the post. And that way I don't worry about it accidentally making contact. Now let's take a look at gusseting up those sliders now that they're on there. We want to make sure that we're distributing the load between the slider leg and the frame of the chassis. That way we can hold up more weight on that thing and take a little bit more hits. A couple options that I have here. One option you can do, just a little piece of 1/4 inch. And so say that's our slider leg and that's the frame there. You just take your 1/4 inch, slap it in there, burn it to the frame, burn it to the leg. You got some decent support. It's going to hold up. It's going to do pretty well for you. What I like to do is I actually fold up these little saddle pieces here. They're a little bit more intensive, but I think they look a little bit nicer. You can see you actually get a little bit more tie into the tube. You spread the load a little bit more on the tube, but then it just is a decent looking piece. A little bit extra effort, but I always like the way that those look. Back to the land of janky homemade tools. So I made this die setup years ago. I just like the saddle gussets that I use. So I've just got this thing set up. It works. Could it be better? Definitely. Does it get the job done? Absolutely. So currently I stick with it. One day if I start doing tons and tons of these things, then I might actually change the program, but not today. Thing is a lot of times when you're bending steel, if you cut the piece prior to bending it, a lot of times you can end up with weird folds and bends and kinks in it. So I like to cut a nice big piece and then just trim it down to fit. Also, no fancy pneumatic setter for this guy. So it gives me roughly the shape that I'm looking for, but then I'm able to manipulate it and make it work better. But at least I get the nice clean radius with the die that I have there. So I started all this. I got one of them all trimmed down, all nice and clean, got the shape and design that I needed. Then I just transferred that to my wonderful templating material again. So now that matches that one. So I can take my little template, slap it onto each of these, and I know where I need to make my trims to make that thing fit. 7 more to go. Let's do it. Got 8 saddles ready to go, bent up, trimmed up, ready to go. Let's grab the glue gun and burn them in. So there's rock sliders all buttoned up, finally able to get that one taken care of. It was a lot of fun. I always enjoyed being able to bend some tube, fabricate, do some cutting, welding, grinding. It's always good times. But what do you guys think? Let me know. So these ones, again, we've got the nice little lead in on the front end here so that the rocks will kind of slide up the edge. We got a nice little bend on the back end. Plenty of room for a good step, get in and out of the Jeep. I like to keep my sliders relatively tight to the body. You can see, I mean, the outer edge there, we're probably looking about 3 inches to the outside. But it's enough room that it's going to keep rocks from getting directly on the body without it being a full-on shelf that sticks out, I don't know, 6 inches or so. I always prefer not to go that route with it. So that's how I like to do sliders. Been doing them this way for many years. Always work out real well for me. Drop a comment below. Let me know. How do you guys like to do your sliders? What material do you like to use? Do you like to bend tube? Do you use straight tube? Let me know. I'm always curious to find out what people are doing. But hope you guys like this one. We'll catch you out there on the next one.